cells were being torn open by something vast, mechanical, and unstoppable. Long before the first bomb fell, people sensed it. Farmers paused in frozen fields. Factory workers looked up through broken windows. Children woke crying, not from sound, but from a pressure in the air, an unnatural heaviness that pressed against the chest. Then the engines arrived. Hundreds of them. Thousands. A rolling thunder that did not pass, did not fade, but grew stronger with every second. This was not a storm. This was the Allied bomber force, steel wings stretched across the darkness, carrying the weight of an entire war. World War II did not begin in the sky, but it would be decided there. And at the heart of that decision were the bombers, massive, slow, brutally vulnerable machines that were never meant to be graceful. They were meant to endure, to carry destruction across oceans, to fly farther, higher, and deeper into enemy territory than anyone thought possible. Inside one of those bombers, a young American pilot named Daniel Harper gripped the controls of a B-17 Flying Fortress as the formation pushed eastward. He could not see the ground. Only darkness below and silver shapes above, dozens of bombers locked into tight formation, wingtip to wingtip, each crew trusting the others with their lives. Harper had trained for 2 years for this moment. Endless drills, simulated fires, practice bailouts, classroom lectures about engines, navigation, and survival. None of it prepared him for the smell inside the cockpit now: oil, sweat, cold metal, and fear. The B-17 shook as flak bursts bloomed ahead like black flowers. "Steady," Harper muttered, though his voice barely reached his own ears. These aircraft were miracles of engineering. For engines, a wingspan wider than a city street, defensive guns bristling from nose to tail. They were designed to survive damage that should have killed them: missing panels, dead engines, wounded crewmen still working their stations. But miracles could still burn. As the bombers crossed the coast, searchlights snapped on below, stabbing the sky. German flak batteries opened fire, shells bursting at altitude with terrifying precision. The aircraft lurched violently as shrapnel tore through aluminum skin. Harper felt the controls stiffen. Somewhere behind him, a gunner screamed. This was strategic bombing. Not a single raid, but a philosophy of war. The Allies believed that if they could dominate the sky, they could cripple factories, rail yards, oil refineries, and morale itself. Bomb the enemy's ability to fight, and the ground war would follow. It was a theory paid for in blood. Bomber crews knew the statistics. Missions where 1 in 5 aircraft didn't return. Crews were wiped out in seconds. Planes colliding in cloud banks or spiraling down in flames after losing an engine. Yet every morning, they climbed back aboard. Because if they didn't, the war would never end. And so the Allied bomber campaign began, not as a single operation, but as a relentless, grinding pressure that would stretch from the deserts of North Africa to the frozen skies over Germany, from daylight precision raids to firebombing infernos that turned cities into ash. The machines that dominated the sky were not invincible, but they were unstoppable. The bomber war was won long before the first bombs fell, inside factories that never slept. Across the United States and Britain, entire cities were reshaped around production. Assembly lines stretched for miles. Women replaced men at riveting stations. Teenagers learned to read blueprints before they learned algebra. Every hour mattered. Every delay cost lives at the front. The B-17 Flying Fortress became a symbol of American industrial power. So did its younger cousin, the B-24 Liberator, faster, longer-ranged, capable of carrying heavier bomb loads. British crews relied on the Avro Lancaster, a dark-bellied giant designed to haul massive payloads deep into enemy territory, including bombs so large they had to be custom-built for a single mission. These were not elegant machines. They were blunt instruments. Each bomber represented a compromise between range, altitude, speed, and survivability. Armor was added, then stripped away to save weight. Guns multiplied as enemy fighters improved. Engines were pushed beyond safe limits, because there was no time for caution. Inside the factories, workers understood something terrifying. The aircraft they built would be flown into hell. They wrote names on fuselages. Painted nose art, pin-up girls, cartoon characters, symbols of luck. It was a superstition, maybe, or a quiet acknowledgement that once the plane left the runway, it belonged to fate. Training fields filled with new crews, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, engineers, radio operators, gunners. 10 men per aircraft, each dependent on the others. One mistake could doom them all. Daniel Harper remembered his first time walking toward a bomber. It looked impossibly large. alive almost, as if it were watching him. By 1943, the bomber war intensified. Daylight raids over Germany exposed a deadly truth. Even heavily armed bombers could not survive alone. Enemy fighters tore into formations, exploiting blind spots, shredding aircraft before escorts could intervene. Losses mounted. Commanders faced a brutal decision: pull back or push harder. They chose harder. The Allies refined formations. Tight boxes of bombers overlapping fields of fire, turning the sky into a floating fortress. They accepted losses as the price of progress. Because every factory destroyed, every rail line cut, brought the end closer. And slowly the tide began to shift. Long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang finally gave bombers protection all the way to their targets. Enemy interceptors fell in growing numbers. The bombers kept coming. Not faster, not safer, but in numbers no enemy could match. The sky was no longer contested. It was claimed. By 1943, the bomber crews no longer measured missions in miles or hours. They measured them in chances. Chances of making it through flak. Chances of surviving fighters. Chances of coming home with the same crew you left with. Daniel Harper's logbook had begun to change. The early entries were neat, hopeful. Dates, aircraft numbers, weather notes. But as the missions piled up, the handwriting tightened, pressed harder into the paper, as if he were trying to anchor himself to something solid. The daylight bombing campaign over Germany was supposed to be precise. That was the promise. High altitude, visual targeting. Factories, rail yards, oil depots. Destroy the machinery of war without destroying the cities themselves. Reality disagreed. On one mission over Schweinfurt, Harper watched an entire formation ahead of him dissolve in fire. German fighters tore through the bombers with ruthless efficiency, cannons ripping aluminum apart like paper. Parachutes bloomed, some not enough. AB-17 rolled inverted, trailing smoke, then vanished into the clouds. No one spoke on the intercom. There were moments when fear became so overwhelming it flattened everything else. Don't panic. Worse. A hollow, paralyzing awareness that there was nowhere to run. You sat in your seat, hands on controls, waiting to see if the next burst of flak had your name on it. The machines endured punishment that defied belief. Bombers limped home with engines shot out, tails half gone, entire sections shredded. Crews patched holes with whatever they could find. Sometimes they landed. Sometimes they didn't. And still, the raids continued. Across the Channel, British crews faced a different war in the sky. Night bombing. Long, cold hours over blacked-out cities, guided by instruments and faint signals. The Lancaster crews flew low and deep, carrying bomb loads so heavy the aircraft struggled to lift off the runway. Firestorms followed them. Hamburg burned for days. Entire neighborhoods vanished. The heat was so intense it created its own weather, winds that sucked oxygen from the streets, people, and shelters below. Some airmen couldn't reconcile what they saw. Others told themselves the same truth commanders repeated endlessly. Every bomb dropped here saves lives elsewhere. Harper didn't know what to believe anymore. He only knew that the enemy was still fighting, and so were they. Then came a change that altered everything. Escort fighters. The P-51 Mustangs arrived like angels with guns. Sleek, fast, relentless. For the first time, bombers were no longer alone beyond the coastline. Enemy fighters were hunted instead of merely endured. The sky shifted. Losses dropped. Confidence crept back. Crews began to believe, quietly, cautiously, that the bombers might actually win this war. But victory had a cost still unpaid. And it was about to be collected in full. The largest bomber operation in history began without ceremony. No speeches. No dramatic countdown. Just orders stamped and final. On the morning of the mission, Harper stared at the briefing map and felt his stomach sink. The red line cut straight into the heart of enemy territory, deeper than he'd ever flown. The target was critical: oil production. Without it, the enemy's war machine would grind to a halt. Everyone understood what that meant. The defenses would be brutal. As the bombers assembled, the sky filled with motion, hundreds, then thousands of aircraft climbing into formation. Sunlight glinted off wings until the air itself seemed made of metal. Flak began early. It came in thick, precise patterns, bursting at altitude with terrifying accuracy. The bomber shook violently as fragments tore through the fuselage. One engine coughed, then stabilized. Another crew reported damage to their bomb bay doors. "Hold formation," came the order. Harper's mouth was dry. His hands hurt from gripping the controls too tightly. Fighters attacked in waves. Head-on passes that gave gunners only seconds to react. Cannon fire hammered the nose. The cockpit filled with smoke. "Bomb run," the bombardier called. Those words froze time. The aircraft flew straight and level, exactly what the enemy needed. Flak thickened. The sky erupted. A bomber to Harper's left took a direct hit. It vanished in a white flash. No parachutes. Then the bombs were away. The aircraft leapt upward, suddenly lighter. Harper banked hard as the formation broke, Mustangs diving to intercept enemy fighters. Below, the target burned. As they turned for home, Harper felt something unfamiliar: hope. Thin, fragile, but real. By the way, if you're clinging to this moment with me, riding through the chaos and the silence afterward, make sure to hit subscribe. There's more ahead, and the story isn't finished yet. The return flight was quiet. Too quiet. One bomber after another peeled away, damaged, wounded, barely airborne. Some never made it back. Empty bunks waited on the ground, silent and accusing. But the results were undeniable. Oil production plummeted. Enemy aircraft were grounded. Armored divisions stalled. The bomber campaign had finally struck the enemy's heart. The machines that dominated the sky had done what they were built to do. Yet as Harper climbed down from his aircraft that night, exhaustion crushing him, he realized something chilling. The war wasn't ending. It was changing. And the final act would demand even more from the men and the machines that ruled the WWII late 1944. The bomber crews no longer spoke of if they would be hit. Only how badly. The war in the sky had evolved again. Enemy fighters were fewer now, but desperation made them deadlier. Rocket interceptors clawed upward at impossible speeds. Anti-aircraft guns fired with manic precision. Every mile over hostile territory felt heavier than the last. Daniel Harper had survived more missions than most. His crew was thinner now, replacements cycling in, faces unfamiliar, laughter quieter. The war had aged them all beyond recognition. On a winter night raid, the Lancaster bombers crossed the coast under cloud cover. No moon, no stars, only darkness and the hum of engines. Below them lay a city already scarred by previous raids. Factories ringed by. Neighborhoods. Rail lines threading through homes. The bombs fell anyway. Fire blossomed outward, merging into something monstrous. The heat rose so violently that the aircraft lurched upward as if shoved from below. Smoke climbed higher than the bombers themselves. Harper stared down and felt something twist inside his chest. He had told himself for years that this was necessary, that every mission shortened the war, that every target destroyed saved lives on the ground somewhere else. But the ash rising beneath his wings felt personal now. Back at base, no one celebrated. Ground crews refueled silently. Mechanics worked through the night. The machines were repaired because there was no choice. The next mission was already posted. Across the globe, bombers struck everywhere: Italy, France, the Pacific. B-29 superfortresses carried the war to Japan, flying higher, farther, heavier than anything before them. Cities burned there too. Wood and paper structures vanished in waves of fire. The bomber war had reached its most terrible efficiency. And still it wasn't over. Spring 1945 arrived without relief. Enemy resistance faltered, then surged unpredictably. Suicide attacks. Last-ditch flak barges. Pilots who knew they wouldn't survive but flew anyway. Harper flew what he believed would be his final mission over Germany, on a morning thick with clouds. The target barely mattered anymore. The enemy was collapsing. Everyone knew it. Then flak struck. The aircraft shuddered violently. One engine flamed out. Hydraulic pressure dropped. The bomber fell out of formation, suddenly alone. Fighters appeared, ragged, desperate, vicious. The gunners fired until their barrels glowed. The aircraft took hit after hit. Smoke filled the cabin. Someone was screaming. Someone else is praying. Harper forced the bomber downward, skimming cloud tops, coaxing life from dead engines through sheer will. Somehow, impossibly, they crossed back over friendly lines. When the wheels hit the runway, the aircraft collapsed, nose first, sliding to a stop in sparks and fire. Ground crews dragged the survivors free. Harper lay on the concrete, staring at the sky he had fought for so long. It was quiet. Weeks later, the war in Europe ended. In the Pacific, it ended with 2 flashes brighter than the sun, delivered by bombers unlike any the world had seen. The sky fell silent afterward, not with relief, but with awe and fear. The machines that dominated the sky had reshaped warfare forever. Years passed. Bombers rusted in desert fields. Museums polished aluminum skins until they gleamed again. Children climbed inside, wide-eyed, unable to imagine fear in a place so still. Daniel Harper visited one such aircraft decades later. AB-17. Restored. Perfect. He ran a hand along the fuselage, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. He remembered the heat, the noise, the smell of smoke and oil. The friends who never came home. The bomber had not been evil. It had been a tool. A brutal, brilliant, terrifying expression of human ingenuity harnessed for survival. The Allied bombers had dominated the sky not because they were unstoppable, but because the people who flew and built them refused to stop. And long after the last engine shut down, the echo of those machines still lived in the air.